Snowed in with a Single Dad. By Melinda Curtis. Prologue. Once upon a time, there were two little red-headed girls. Identical twins who lived in Hollywood, were best friends and wore princess dresses whenever they could get away with it. Their parents were Hollywood royalty, a studio head and a talent agent. Said parents traveled a lot. They entertained a lot. But they also fought a lot, which upset the girls. Laurel was a girly girl, in love with shoes and fabrics, hairstyles and makeup, peace and quiet. From an early age, she devoured fashion magazines and red carpet shows. She begged the family maid to teach her how to sew, imagining a future where she created pretty dresses for celebrities. Making smooth, even stitches became a welcome escape from the household's chaos. But sometimes, there was no escape. As for Ashley, she might have watched too many soap operas and romantic movies while the maid taught Laurel to sew. Those hours in front of the TV gave Ashley a fascination with people, their emotions, and how they express them. The slightest of smiles, the well of tears, the shudder of bent shoulders. Body language said so much without saying anything at all. And pretending to be a character on screen? That was sometimes better than being Ashley Monroe. Like many identical twins, Laurel and Ashley learned early on that one could easily be mistaken for the other. And like many identical twins, they learned early on to take advantage of their mirror-like facades and implement what they called the twin switch. The girls would have lived happily ever after in obscurity if not for their parents stumbling upon 5-year-old Ashley reenacting a scene from a soap opera with what they said was amazing talent. Mama Monroe enrolled her in acting class, hired a writer to create a television series around her and devoted herself to making Ashley a star. Which meant Laurel was often forgotten in her twin's shadow. Unless she was needed to stand in her place. Chapter 1. Don't encourage the Monroes. Standing in the kitchenette of the lodgepole inn, Laurel Monroe stopped steeping her tea bag, stopped mentally mending the tears in the fabric of her life and paused, trying to place that voice. Masculine. 3 men were living or staying at the inn. Authoritative. 2 were natural-born leaders. Presumptuous. Given her father wasn't in town, that narrowed it down to 1. Mitch Kincaid, mayor of Second Chance, Idaho, and the man who ran the lodgepole inn. A month ago she'd thought Mitch had kind eyes. 3 weeks ago he'd held her head when she'd been too weak to keep it out of the toilet. And then last week he'd cast shade on her family, the wealthy Monroes, not once but 3 times. Dad. A much younger, feminine voice reached Laurel. Gabby. Masculine. Authoritative. Presumptuous. That was Mitch all right, talking to his preteen daughter. We're not going to make friends with the Monroes. They need to leave town before it's too late. Too bad for Mitch that the Monroes owned Second Chance. It was their town to ruin. Not that that was their plan. Not that they had a plan. Not that Laurel had a plan for herself either. Not yet anyway. She'd make one after her doctor's appointment 2 days from now. But the town. Laurel still found the ownership part hard to believe. Years ago her grandfather had bought Second Chance, every ramshackle cabin, every building housing an underperforming business, every plot of land, which might have been a smart investment if Grandpa Harlan hadn't gone on to charge residents and those who ran businesses leases of $1 a year. Her beloved grandfather had left his hometown in better economic condition than he'd left his grandchildren. According to his will, the vast Monroe fortune was designated for Grandpa Harlan's 4 sons, but only if they fired Harlan's grandchildren, who all worked for the Monroe Holding Corporation, and evicted them from Monroe-owned residences. Job? Gone. Rent-free condo? Gone. Trust fund? Never had one. And now she was pregnant? Don't make friends with the Monroes? What did Mitch have against the Monroes? The Monroes were the reason struggling businesses like the lodgepole inn weren't closed. The Monroes were the reason people like Mitch could make a living in the mountains. All I'm saying is I don't want you hanging out with the Monroes, especially Laurel. Mitch opened the door behind the check-in desk and saw Laurel. Mouth dry, Laurel stopped dipping her tea bag. They stared at each other in silence. Mitch Kincaid carried himself like he should be wearing a suit and tie and standing in the corner office of a high-rise. Solidly built, tall and proud. Thick, dark hair cut short. Intelligent brown eyes that could easily read any situation. But he wasn't wearing a suit or surveying the world from a corner office. Mitch wore a navy cotton sweater over faded blue jeans and stood in an inn built entirely from logs. It was just that he wore the casual attire the same way he spoke. With authority. Not that Laurel or her cousins acknowledged his authority as mayor. And maybe that was part of Mitch's problem. He had no control over what happened in town next, and that seemed to be making him cranky. Case in point, he made a grumpy noise to acknowledge Laurel. "Bad morning, counselor?" Laurel returned her attention to her tea, stung that she was the villain in this scenario. "And Mitch?" He could have acknowledged her testy greeting with a muttered apology. Or a cocky eyebrow quirk. Instead, he went for a repeat of the grumpy noise. Laurel had a grumpy noise, too. But before she could use it, the aroma of bacon drifted from the plate Mitch carried, turning Laurel's stomach once, twice, a third time. Baby doesn't like bacon. Which was a shame, because Laurel loved bacon. Maple bacon. Smoked bacon. Crispy bacon with burnt edges. Laurel disposed of the tea bag and willed her stomach to stop doing barrel rolls. "Are you going to eat that?" As in immediately? "Is that Laurel?" Gabby poked her young face around Mitch's wide chest, lisping slightly from her new retainer. "Hi." Gabby's smile was bright. Her intelligent dark eyes and quick wit seemed to be a gift from her father. Presumably, her long, straight strawberry blonde hair was a gift from her mother, who wasn't around and apparently never had been. "Ignore him, Laurel." Gabby poked her father in the ribs. "His bark is worse than his bite." "So you keep telling me." Laurel tried to discount the way nausea crept up her throat. "Are you going to eat all that bacon?" "Smells good, doesn't it?" Mitch was no longer looking at Laurel, or he might have noticed her green pallor. "Did you want some?" "I made plenty." No. Laurel took a step back and breathed shallowly. Baby definitely doesn't like bacon. Despite Laurel's best efforts, the aroma of greasy bacon filled her nostrils. Her stomach took a nosedive. "Could you eat a little quicker?" She waved her hand in the air, trying to encourage Mitch to eat up. Mitch gently pushed Gabby back and closed the door in her face, eliciting a muffled, "Dad. Ignore me and my bark, darling daughter." Mitch went to the check-in desk and deposited his plate there, sparing Laurel a half grin. "How are you this morning? If you smile at me like that any longer, I might forget you consider me and my family the plague of second chance." People rarely considered Laurel trouble, if they considered her at all. She averted her gaze. "If you're asking, did I upchuck in my room last night? The answer is no. If you're asking if I might lose it now, well, baby is undecided." Mitch bit into a piece of bacon and chewed slowly. He slid Laurel a look that said many things. "Thank heavens this Monroe won't try to snatch my bacon. Thank heavens this Monroe didn't get sick in the bathroom I have to clean later. Thank heavens this Monroe isn't bringing up the conversation she just overheard." Laurel wasn't about to let Mitch get by on that last one. "Is there something you want to get off your chest?" "You're very tall, broad chest." Baby was undercutting Laurel's perspective when it came to men. Really, Baby was only undercutting Laurel's perspective when it came to this man. There was a handsome cowboy sitting in the common room recuperating from a nasty broken leg. Laurel's imagination didn't stray across appropriate lines when it came to Zeke. Nope. It was just Mitch who got under her skin. "Off my chest." Mitch took another bite of bacon. Not a blessed thing. When it came to repartee, Mitch was a worthy adversary. Not surprising, given he'd been a defense attorney before he decided innkeeping was his calling. "Dad, be nice." Gabby shouted through the closed door. "I am." Mitch grinned like the evil overlord he probably thought he was. He turned back to Laurel, black hair glinting in the sunlight streaming through the window. "Are you going somewhere?" No. Laurel took a sip of her tea, breathing in the clean scent that masked the bacon. "Didn't you tell me the roads wouldn't be open until tomorrow?" Second Chance was one of the snowiest places in America and was often isolated during winter. Outside, some drifts had to be at least 8 feet tall. "I don't expect the snowplows to make it over the pass until tomorrow." But, Mitch gestured to her attire with a burnt piece of bacon. "You're dressed to go out on the town." Silently cursing bacon, Laurel glanced down at her black geometric V-neck tunic and silver leggings. One hid her growing topside and one was forgiving of her expanding waistline. And her black leather booties. What did he expect her to wear? Clunky snow boots? "Counselor," she'd taken to calling Mitch that when she was annoyed because he'd taken to calling her Miss Laurel, like she was high society and he was her chauffeur. "You may have noticed I like clothes." Up until a month ago, clothes had been the way Laurel made a living, costuming actors for movies and styling her identical twin sister for the red carpet. Dressing well isn't a crime. It sometimes seemed it was around Mitch, whose plucky preteen daughter regularly wore ill-fitting, boy-cut blue jeans and t-shirts with iron-on transfers. Laurel would enjoy seeing the delicately blossoming beauty in a floral print skirt and pastel blouse. Not exactly appropriate attire for the mountains in winter. "I love the sound of kindly people exchanging kindly greetings in the morning." That was Zeke, recuperating cowboy and slinger of singers. "Good morning, Zeke." To avoid the lingering smell of bacon, Laurel carried her tea upstairs. "Clothes aren't evil. I'm not admitting defeat this round, counselor." "I wouldn't expect any less, Miss Laurel." If Laurel hadn't been queasy and bothered by her attraction to Mitch, she might have smiled. The inn stairs creaked as she climbed. The hallway upstairs listed to one side and protested every step she took. The outer wall was made of thick, stacked logs with gray chinking in between. The inner wall was flat sanded wood, stained the color of redwood. It was a far cry from the Hollywood mansion of her youth. "Sorry, baby. Mama won't be feeding you with a silver spoon." Reality check number 1. Laurel's share of Second Chance wasn't worth enough to buy silver spoons. Take the Lodgepole Inn. It wasn't a 5-star hotel. If it had a website, which it did not, it would have touted itself as a rustic code for outdated. She opened a warped door that stuck and entered her room. It had faded brown carpet, a bed covered with an artfully crafted sunflower quilt, a woefully small closet and an equally small bathroom appointed with pink fixtures. From what she'd seen, the rest of Second Chance was in the same, or worse, condition. She sat on the edge of her bed and sipped her tea, staring at the pink rhinestone-studded evening gown she'd made for her famous twins' latest opening night. "Ashley. Ashley. Look over here." The flash of camera bulbs had blinded. The pop of those same bulbs had made ears ring. The cries of the photographers had been deafening. Reality check number 2. Ashley had never worn that pink dress. Laurel had stepped into her twins' shoes, literally, and masqueraded as Ashley Monroe, up-and-coming starlet. Laurel set her mug on the scarred bedside table and lay back on the bed to stare at the ceiling. Her days being a double for her identical twin in Hollywood were coming to an end. Soon, she wouldn't be able to fit into her sister's clothes. Anxiety sat immobile on Laurel's chest like a semi-truck stuck in LA traffic. Her sister was a joy, a talented actress, and a delicate flower. Laurel had spent most of her life watching out for her. But reality check number 3. Laurel was pregnant, and she hadn't worked up the courage to tell her family or the famous actor responsible for her pregnancy. Her news. It wasn't likely to be well received. Her news. It would make her the least popular Monroe with more than just Mitch Kincaid.
"We've got to get rid of the Monroes." A short time after Laurel had overheard his conversation with Gabby, Mayor Mitch Kincaid presided over an emergency council meeting held in the Bent Nickel Diner. "Them staying. It's not what Harlan wanted. Or what he promised them 10 years ago. Promises?" Mitch's father had scoffed at him from behind security glass. "You might just as well ask for rainbows. Honor a promise?" His father hadn't known how. Looking back, Harlan's promises sounded a lot like a pot of gold at the end of a rainbow. Harlan said by disowning his grandchildren and leaving them our town. He said they'd agree with his stewardship and curate Second Chance remotely. Ivy, who ran the Bent Nickel, paced behind the counter. While they made their own fortunes elsewhere. Mackenzie nodded. She ran the general store and garage. That's what Harlan hoped, Mitch reminded them. Harlan banked on their hunger to make their mark in the world once he freed them from obligation to his fortune. But he didn't bank on Shane. He's a fixer, all right. Roy, the town handyman, pushed up the sleeves of his long johns until they disappeared beneath the cuffs of his blue coveralls. He blew out a breath. And Shane Monroe ain't leavin' until he fixes this town. How's he going to boost our profits? Ivy asked unhappily. In winter, no less. Second Chance had a unique rhythm. 7 or 8 months out of the year, they did a brisk business in town, or at least enough commerce to get by. And when the passes began closing in winter, things slowed down. Snowed in, Second Chance residents spent more time with family, more time gathering and gossiping at the Bent Nickel, operating fewer hours or closing down altogether. Let's face it. Shane's fixes will likely improve his bottom line, Mitch added, not sounding any happier. That is, if they aren't interested in leasing to us anymore and decide to sell the town. The coffee he'd been drinking felt like acid in his stomach. But if it comes to selling, I'm sure they'll give us the opportunity to buy back our homes and businesses. They stared at each other in silence, because none of them were convinced of that. The Monroes hadn't made any promises or guarantees. Home never looks the same after you leave. Those were the first words Harlan Monroe had spoken to Mitch. The millionaire had been standing next to a beat-up Ford pickup, gazing at the town's main drag with an air of sadness. I suppose I'll need a room for a few nights, if you've got one available. Mitch had just bought the inn. He was adjusting to life outside the courtroom and his role as a small-town single dad. Harlan's wife, Estelle, had just lost a long battle with cancer. Harlan was coming to terms with his own mortality and how to manage his legacy. A few nights' stay turned into a few weeks. Surprisingly, the notoriously media-shy Harlan had been a talker, particularly candid when he was one-on-one. He shared his past, his road to wealth and his hopes for his grandchildren, who he considered too privileged. And he expected frankness in return. And that's why I left Second Chance, Harlan had concluded his tale as he and Mitch sipped whiskey on the inn's back porch one night, serenaded by an owl in a nearby pine tree. You know, I've never told my grandkids that story. I love them, but try holding a meaningful conversation with a dozen kids staring at cell phones. You should tell stories like that to a biographer, Mitch had said. If you tell them at all. Says the former lawyer with caution in his voice. Harlan had chuckled, a deep rumbly sound that hinted at fluid in his lungs. And then he'd switched gears. None of the businesses in town seem at capacity. Tell me about your bottom line. Mitch had. I want to invest in Second Chance, Harlan had told Mitch weeks later, his small satchel in hand. I want it to live on, like my business legacy, but I don't want John Q. Public to know. He'd explained his plan to buy up real estate in Second Chance and lease it back to residents. He'd shared his idea about guarding his legacy, the non-disclosure agreements with those who accepted his offer, agreements that would expire 1 year from his death, a date coinciding with the release of his authorized biography. Look. Mac tossed her dark braid over one shoulder, bringing Mitch back to the present when her hair almost hit him. Shane means well. He uses Mitch's snowmobile to deliver my grocery orders to folks without charge. My pocketbook isn't complaining about them staying longer, but they need to build lives for themselves elsewhere, Ivy said, her pacing stomping on Mitch's last nerve. And forget about changing anything in Second Chance. We like our quiet winters. It's what's made this town like a family. She choked on the word and clutched her throat. Calm down, Roy said. We'd all feel better if they skedaddled. But we ain't doin' so bad. One Monroe left already. Mitch frowned. Granted, one of the Monroes, Ella, had left town nearly 2 weeks ago. If Mitch had his druthers, he'd be rid of another Monroe. Not Sophie and her young twin boys, who posed no threat. Not Shane and his endless ideas about how to make the town a thriving metropolis, completely at odds with Harlan's wishes. No. If Mitch had his druthers, it would be Laurel who left next, the petite woman with the vibrant red hair who sometimes looked as if someone had deflated her spirit. When Mitch saw the unguarded side of Laurel, something inside him softened. Mitch set his jaw. Now wasn't the time to be sympathetic. Gabby showed too much interest in the redhead. Laurel might have arrived in Second Chance pale, pregnant and exhausted, but she had big city, look-at-me style, like his ex-wife. An impressionable Gabby was enthralled, despite the fact that Laurel didn't fit in the Idaho high country. Her high-heeled, black leather boots weren't made for snow. Her paper-thin, black leather jacket wasn't made for temperatures below 50. For heaven's sake, she had an evening gown hanging in her bathroom. Which Mitch only knew about because he had to clean said bathroom. Which, up until 2 weeks ago, Mitch could only reach by walking through the trail of clothes Laurel left on the floor, dropped, presumably, wherever she was when she undressed. Which, Mitch imagined, because he was divorced, not dead, was a process that wasn't conducted when she was standing still. Shoes had littered the space required to swing the door open, and pants, leggings, sweaters and t-shirts fanned 5 to 10 feet from there. Unmentionables of every color, indelibly marked in his memory, had landed closest to the bathroom door and the glittery pink evening gown. Mitch pressed at the ache in his temples. He'd spent too many nights pacing, worrying, wondering what he could have done differently with Harlan's offer. Granted, our deals with Harlan were a gamble to begin with. The buyout and low lease were like a golden ticket, one with an expiration date. When he sold, Mitch had figured after Harlan died, he and Gabby would move elsewhere. But he hadn't anticipated the town winning him over. In Harlan's defense, no one could have predicted Laurel would arrive pregnant and be put on bed rest. Or that the other two would stay to support her. Mac rolled her shoulders. We're lucky it's only the 3 of them. It could have been all 12. Harlan had assured them his grandchildren, who worked mostly high-profile jobs in the movie industry, finance, museums, oil, yacht building or luxury hotels, wouldn't want to stay in their small town. 3 little birdies to force out of their comfy little nests, Roy pointed out. And then things will return to normal, just like Harlan promised. You'll see. Mitch was having a hard time seeing anything other than disappearing rainbows. Return to normal. When Ella Monroe left, we lost document. Who will we lose with the next Monroe we get rid of? You, Roy. Ivy stopped pacing behind the diner's counter and crossed her arms over her gray hooded sweatshirt, covering up the neon yellow letters that spelled out "Best Mommy Ever." The next nearest handyman is in Ketchum and the nearest medical clinic is an hour's drive from here. The worry in Ivy's voice was hard to miss. It wasn't that long ago that her oldest had dislocated his shoulder and her youngest had sprained both his ankles. They were younger than Mitch's daughter and growing like clumsy weeds. Laurel Monroe had probably never been a clumsy weed. Something clattered in the diner's kitchen. Ow! Nick, Ivy's youngest, ran out in his Star Wars pajamas, holding his finger toward Ivy. His brown hair was in need of a brushing or a trim and it bounced with each urgent step. Mom, I shut my finger in the microwave and dropped my plate of nachos. Ivy picked him up and settled him on her hip. Pumpkin, what have I told you about the microwave? Grinning, Roy elbowed Mitch and whispered, what have you told him about eating nachos for breakfast? That comment earned the old man Ivy's evil eye. Not to use it, the kindergartner wailed, fat tears rolling down his cheeks. And I did, and now my finger is broken. Let me see. Ivy inspected Nick's intact digit. Look. It bends. No bone showing. No blood dripping. You know what that means. Nick drew in a shuddering breath. I have to clean up my mess. He tucked his head in the crook of Ivy's neck and cried some more. Ivy kissed his thatch of wild hair, put him down and sent him back to the kitchen. Thank heavens there are no customers around to witness that. The Bent Nickel was the town gathering place, a time capsule with its checkerboard linoleum floors, green pleather and chrome counter stools, not to mention the yellowed pictures on the walls showing the town back in its heyday, cavalry units, trappers, miners, ranchers. The snow had been thick last night. It would take residents longer than usual to make their way into the diner for their morning news. No customers. Thank heavens there ain't no health inspectors around. Roy bowed his shoulders and sniggered, earning another glare from Ivy. We should get back on point. Mitch drained the last of his coffee, thinking of Laurel at home in Hollywood. He could picture her in slim-fitting blue jeans and a tank top, carrying coffee from some posh and popular place, red hair swinging across her shoulders with each high-heeled step. Get back on point. Take your own advice, Kincaid. It's not like we can evict them. Roy rubbed a hand over his breastbone. They own the place. Heartburn, Roy? Ivy asked in a distracted voice, attention on the kitchen. How much coffee have you had this morning? His pointy chin went up. I'm allowed 3 cups. According to Doc. Mac asked with a sly look Mitch's way. She enjoyed teasing the old man. Or something you read. Roy's chin stayed up, but he didn't answer. What if the Monroes don't want to pay the doctor's stipend anymore? Ivy's eyes slanted with worry, her gaze still on her son. They're contractually obligated to provide us with a doctor through the end of the year, Mitch reassured her, not that he felt reassured. We just have to find a physician willing to come. Mitch had posted an ad for a doctor the day Noah left. Let's not panic. Not yet anyway, Ivy grumbled, pushing her straight brown hair back from her face. No one but Odette has wanted to see a doctor since Noah left. We'll find a doctor, Mitch pitched his voice to reassure the way Harlan used to on his quarterly visits. Their wealthy benefactor always seemed to provide second chance with what they needed, like a magician pulling a rabbit from a hat. But the fact remains, the Monroes aren't leaving and they don't strike me as the kind of people who want to live in log cabins and outdated homes at a remote fork in the road. Because that was just it. Second Chance wasn't anybody's destination. It was located where 2 narrow ribbons of highway intersected at the base of the Sawtooth Mountains. Drivers passed through on their way to Boise to the west, Challis to the north or Ketchum to the south. Roy scrunched his face into a deeper cascade of wrinkles. You think the Monroes want to turn this place into the next Challis? Ivy hugged herself tighter. Or Haley. Or Ketchum, Max said glumly. Those were some of the Idaho towns the rich and famous had bought property in to get away from it all. The influx of wealthy residents had driven up real estate prices and given rise to restaurants with appetizers like black cherries wrapped in maple-drizzled bacon. Not that there was anything wrong with that type of food in Manhattan or Hollywood. But Second Chance was more of a loaded nachos or twice-baked potatoes kind of town. I could lose the diner. Ivy gripped the worn countertop with both hands, looking older than her 30-ish years. I feel so stupid. Don't be. We all bought into Harlan's dream, Mitch said. He'd welcomed the infusion of cash. He'd bought a new heating unit for the inn, socked away the rest into a college fund for Gabby and then tucked his worries about making ends meet along with it. Second Chance is one of the few remaining towns in the state made up mostly of 100-year-old cabins. Roy interrupted Mitch's wayward thoughts. If we can't honor Harlan's wishes and run his family out of town, there ought to be something we can do to protect it legal-like. I won't let them tear down my place. I was born here, and I plan to die here. Mitch opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Instead, an idea formed. A rough idea not yet ready to be put forth to the town council. You're onto something. Roy nudged him. I can tell. He was. Maybe we do have something else up our sleeve. A final card to play if Shane couldn't be dissuaded from fixing Second Chance.
Chapter 2. 2 boys tumbled into Laurel's room with the enthusiasm only oversugared 4-year-olds could bring. They came at just the right time. Laurel had been practicing speeches on how to tell her family she was pregnant, each worse than the last. It didn't help that she kept getting distracted by the image of Mitch making bacon. Aunt Laurel, the boys cried. She'd earned the title of aunt even though they were technically second cousins. Laurel sat up on her bed, heartened by their enthusiasm. We're cannonballs. Andrew crouched and rolled across the carpet toward her. His identical brother, Alexander, the twin with the cowlick at his crown, rolled on the other side of the bed. Look what I brought you and baby, fresh fruit. Cousin Sophie, mother of the Minion twins, held up a small bunch of bananas and a large yellow apple. Mackenzie at the general store got a shipment yesterday before the pass closed. Wow, she's a good salesperson. We barely got out of there without buying 2 more sleds. Did you call your parents? Or he who you refused to name? That was Sophie, master of the conversational whip-around. The he in question was the father of Laurel's baby, a man whose identity she was keeping secret as long as possible. Secrets made her head ache. Laurel rubbed her temples, remembering the night they'd met. Wyatt Halford had believed he was on a date with Laurel's sister, Ashley. "I'm having a good time, but I have to admit. I'm surprised that you're so. Wyatt had struggled for words, and it had been endearing. His gaze lingered on Laurel's. His smile was completely natural. He hadn't glanced around the restaurant to locate the nearest camera or cell phone aimed his way. He'd been unlike any actor Laurel had been sent on a date with posing as Ashley. Having grown up as a Monroe, Laurel wasn't impressed by beauty or wealth or celebrity. She didn't need what they had. Her job on these first dates was to discourage a second one. But Wyatt Halford. "You're so down to earth," Wyatt had said artlessly, flashing Laurel a smile that curled her toes. "Maybe it's because I hadn't realized you'd know the history of the action film genre. His claim to fame. Or because I've never heard you laugh wholeheartedly. Or simply because you're wearing blue tonight." "Teal," Laurel had whispered, won over. As kids, Mom had always put Ashley in pink and Laurel in a shade of blue or green. On the night of her date with Wyatt, Laurel had argued with her mother about taking Ashley's place. She'd wanted to stay home and work on the pink evening gown pinned to the dressmaker's form in her bedroom. Eventually, Mom had won, as Laurel knew she would. In defiance, Laurel had worn a teal A-line dress, not black or Ashley's signature pink. And this man. This handsome, charming actor beloved by millions, had looked at Laurel and seen something other than the bright, shiny penny that was Ashley Monroe. A simple dinner date had turned into a not-so-simple morning after, something Laurel had carefully neglected to mention to Ashley and her mother. And now nothing was simple. Earth to Laurel. Sophie snapped her fingers in front of Laurel's face. "I'm going to tell them," Laurel reassured her cousin. It was a delicate matter. Wyatt still believed he'd slept with Ashley. How would he feel when he learned he hadn't? What would he do? Sophie slid her red glasses up her slim nose and gave Laurel a look of disapproval, one that worked equally well on 4-year-old boys and 27-year-old pregnant women. Laurel squirmed. "I'll tell them after my doctor's appointment. Weather permitting." Her appointment was at least an hour's drive away in Ketchum. "With a medical all clear, I can go home and tell everyone in person." By then, she'd have her speech down. Her head pounded. She wasn't looking forward to that discussion. Her father, who'd fired and evicted her in favor of inheriting millions, would worry that a man wasn't in the picture. Her mother, who considered Laurel her least successful child, would ask her why a man wasn't in the picture. Her brother Jonah would offer to pound the man who'd once been in the picture. Ashley would do some calculations and ask if Wyatt Halford should be in the picture. And then, everyone would realize that Laurel, the family member most likely to show up for someone else's crisis, was having a catastrophe of her own. Her immediate family was in the entertainment industry. Dad ran Monroe Studios. Mom was a talent manager. Jonah, a script writer. Ashley, an actress. Laurel, an on-set costume designer. Everything she did reflected back upon them. Impersonating a famous actress, sleeping with a famous actor and then having his baby was the kind of sensational news story Hollywood hungered for. It would overshadow every project, every business deal, every media interview her family was involved in from the moment the world found out about it. As for Laurel and her aspirations to be a red carpet dress designer, her revelation would bring rain on that parade. There's no shame in putting yourself first for once. Sophie was still riding the disapproval train, which was headed straight for Laurel. Especially now. Laurel refrained from mentioning that putting herself first was how she'd gotten into this mess. The twins crashed into log walls on either side of Laurel's headboard and cried, "I beat you," simultaneously. They flopped on Laurel's bed and continued to shout, "I won," and "No, I won," at each other. It was a tie. Laurel drew them into her arms and gave them each a kiss. A race too close to call. "Behave, my adorable little heathens." Sophie set the fruit on Laurel's nightstand next to a large water bottle and an extra-large box of unsalted crackers. She pushed her glasses up her nose and gathered her brown hair from her shoulders as she peered at the stack of gossip magazines on the floor. "You need to get rid of these rags. That magazine article about Ashley making that pink dress. Sophie picked up steam. That's just wrong. Don't let Ashley take credit for your talent. Let's not blow this out of proportion. Because the entire pink dress fiasco was Laurel's fault. She was going to have to clean up the dress mess, but it took a back seat to her pregnancy. Please. Ashley owes you a public retraction. When I think of all the times you saved her butt, Sophie tugged down a new red and blue Nordic sweater she'd ordered online. She'd embraced mountain fashion in a way Laurel never would. Listen to me. You've saved my behind a time or two. And there's a time or two more ahead, I'm sure. In fact, I'm waiting for you to get your sea legs back and help me explore the old buildings across the road before you leave. Which were rumored to be stuffed with junk and treasure. Having been an art history major, Sophie considered herself qualified to differentiate between gems and junk. And we're going in just as soon as you get the all clear from the doctor. I can't wait. Actually, Laurel could. She didn't like the cold, cobwebs, bugs or varmints, as Roy over at the diner called the rats and raccoons he said inhabited the old trading post and mercantile. You know, you won't find a Da Vinci in there. A girl can dream. Grinning, Sophie pulled her boys off the bed. Like you used to dream about weddings, wedding dresses, flower girls, and ring bearers. She smoothed Alexander's cowlick. Weddings. Alexander ducked from Sophie's touch. Not that again. We had to hold ring pillows for hours at Uncle Todd's wedding. Andrew referenced their paternal uncle. A wedding. The semi returned to park on Laurel's chest, making her wheeze, making her head pound harder. Wyatt didn't want to marry her. As far as she knew, he hadn't even called Ashley or sent her flowers afterward. Mitch would have sent flowers. Laurel stifled a groan. Mitch would have invited me to stay and then cooked me breakfast in the morning. There was no stifling the groan this time. That's our cue to leave, Aunt Laurel, Sophie sing-songed, herding the boys toward the door. We'll return this afternoon for a book or a movie if you feel better. Quiet descended. Laurel plucked at the seam of the handmade quilt beneath her, stared at the ceiling and contemplated her single status. Not that I'm in love with Wyatt. But no wedding bells meant single motherhood. Laurel sucked in a breath as she contemplated her future. Kids were a huge responsibility. The semi took on additional cargo. It was increasingly difficult to breathe. Women juggle careers and kids by themselves all the time. That was what Sophie had done. She'd been the Monroe art collection curator until the reading of Grandpa Harlan's will. Of course, Sophie'd had permanent fatigue lines on her face that her cute glasses couldn't hide. And granted, she had twins, but that was little comfort. Twins and the Monroe family went together like mosquitoes and still water. Twins. A second, heavier, semi parked on Laurel's chest. What if I'm having twins? Before Laurel had time to hyperventilate, there was a timid knock on her door. Laurel? It was Gabby. Can we come in? We? Gabby and Mitch? What happened to not encouraging the Monroes? Laurel smoothed her hair, imagined Mitch's broad shoulders filling the doorway and invited them in. Gabby entered first. Hope we're not intruding. An old woman appeared behind the preteen. She had a yellow knit cap on her short, coarse gray hair and wore 3 layers on top, a black turtleneck under a thin white sweater under a handmade, gray cable knit cardigan that stretched to her knees. Her neon red snow pants rustled with every step. Odette. Laurel pushed herself up higher. She was surprised to see her, but unable to resist checking the empty hallway for one handsome, grumpy innkeeper. That's me. Odette blocked Laurel's sightline. The old woman was an artisan with yarn and cloth. She knit with precision. She quilted with small, even stitches, and paired fabric of different colors and prints better than some fashion designers Laurel could name. Before Laurel had known she was pregnant, she'd asked her, more like begged, Odette to teach her how to quilt. It wasn't that Laurel's sewing skills needed improvement. She was a master with needle and thread. It was that every fashion designer had a passion that drove them, an imprint that made their work immediately recognizable and gave it that special something. Laurel had yet to find her signature. Clothes she'd made before flitted through her mind. The sleek black pantsuit Laurel had made for her sister to wear to a charity luncheon. The gauzy pink and white sundress Ashley had worn to a friend's beach wedding in the Bahamas. A pink sheath. Rose-splattered pants. A brocade ball gown. They'd all been nice. Well constructed. Well designed. But they lacked a je ne sais quoi, that special something that made one's heart light up with joy. But when Laurel looked at Odette's quilts, she felt a stirring of something inside. A sense of excitement she hadn't felt before. Odette dropped a tan canvas bag brimming with pastel yarn on the bed. "I've come for your first lesson. Can I stay and learn, too?" Gabby asked in a small voice she seldom used. Few people cowed the spunky preteen. Odette eyed Gabby severely as if the young girl had sassed her. "I tried to teach you once before." And by the tone of Odette's voice, Gabby had failed. "I was just a baby then," Gabby said solemnly with that retainer lisp. "That was last summer." "Exactly." The girl nodded. "I was 11. "All right," Odette huffed, removing the knit cap from her coarse gray hair. It sprang free, revealing its true porcupine nature. "But this is your last chance." Gabby thanked the old woman profusely. Odette unloaded yarn balls and wooden knitting needles from her bag, tossing them on the bed the way children toss tissue from a gift box as they search for the prize at the bottom. "Are there quilt quarters in that bag?" Laurel asked, thrilled to be receiving a lesson but confused by all the yarn. Odette's shoulders stiffened. "You can't master quilting until you develop patience and precision." Laurel had patience. For a week, she'd rested in her room all day waiting for her morning sickness to recede. She opened her mouth to say something, but there was a warning in Gabby's eyes and the yarn balls on the bed and Odette's annoyance in the air, so Laurel swallowed back her curiosity and guessed, "You teach patience and precision through knitting?" That earned her an approving nod. "Darn tootin'." Odette finished unpacking the yarn and set her bag aside. Balls of bright purple, subtle teal, soft peach and oatmeal cream were scattered near Laurel's stocking feet. "We'll start with a scarf. Choose a color to begin." Gabby nudged the pink aside and snatched up the vibrant purple. Laurel picked a ball of teal, reminded that her career was at a standstill, of Ashley and Wyatt, and of truths that needed to be told. She had no interest in knitting, but if this was a test to move to quilting instruction and a mental space where she might discover an expressive passion for fashion, Laurel was determined to pass.
Chapter 3. "Hey, Mitch." Shane, Harlan's grandson, came down the inn steps and headed Mitch's way a few minutes after the town council meeting ended. "I wanted to run something by you." Of course, he did. Mitch drew a calming breath. The former hotel chain executive lay awake at night coming up with ideas to improve Second Chance. Shane had a purposeful walk, a mind like a steel trap and a commanding presence. If Mitch were still a lawyer, he'd welcome a guy like Shane on his team. Shane came to a stop in front of Mitch. "We've talked a lot about improving the income of Second Chance residents." He hit just the right note of camaraderie and business. "I want your opinion on the luxury development card." The bottom fell out of Mitch's stomach. Shane continued as if he hadn't just pulled the plug on Mitch's world. "My grandfather was sentimental. He never owned a cell phone or a computer. He conducted business with a handshake and a signature made by putting pen to paper." Mitch nodded. "All true. But he liked to make money." Shane tugged the ends of his too-thin jacket closer together. "And money can be made, good money, by building a luxury resort in Second Chance." Mitch's heart fell toward his stomach. "The last thing I want," Harlan had said to Mitch on more than one occasion, "is for this town to turn into a rich person's playground." When Shane had first arrived in town over a month ago, he and Mitch hadn't hit it off. Shane didn't like how evasive Mitch was regarding Harlan's purchase of the town. Mitch didn't like how evasive Shane was regarding the family's plans toward the town. But recently, they'd managed to find neutral ground, mostly because Shane had admitted all 12 grandchildren had to agree about Second Chance's future and no one had mentioned anything about high-end development. When Mitch didn't immediately answer, Shane asked, "What do you think my grandfather would have thought about a resort here?" The snowflakes thickened. The wind gathered. Time might not have changed the town, but Shane Monroe might. Mitch made a noncommittal noise and looked around the stretch of road that made up the heart of town. Most businesses were located in historic structures dating back to the town's roots when it had been established by one of Harlan Monroe's ancestors. The diner and general store had been competing saloons. The inn had been everything from a barracks to a brothel, although Mitch had argued the latter when Gabby put it in a paper for school. Other cabins and businesses about town had similar Old West histories. During the town council meeting, Mitch had come up with an idea. Apply for historical significance. Could he convince a state board at the town's 100-year-old log cabins were important enough to protect? Would that be enough to stop Shane from tearing them down and building his luxury resort? Mitch? Well, Harlan, shut up, Mitch. In my opinion, Harlan wouldn't. Shane's expression shuddered. Shut up. Shut up. Shut up. Remember the non-disclosure agreement. The one he'd signed when Harlan purchased the lodgepole inn. And then there was the truce himself and Shane. He had to be neutral and diplomatic. He had to. I hate the idea, Mitch blurted. Who does it benefit? Not Mac. He pointed toward the general store, where Mac was creating a Valentine's Day display. There's nothing high-end about what she sells. Or what Ivy serves. Or the accommodations I provide. Shane drew in a breath as if preparing to speak, but Mitch wasn't done. Your grandfather didn't just care about the town. He cared about the people. A general statement, but one he hoped hit home. About the community. Winter is our time to. Objection, counselor, Shane said, using his cousin's nickname for Mitch and holding up a gloveless hand. Let me explain. Have you heard of the concept of due diligence? I've heard of companies willing to take propositions off the table when they don't fit their philosophies. Fancy hotels and restaurants shouldn't be in second chance. I have 11 other owners to consider. Shane's words took on that high and mighty tone that grated on Mitch's ears. If you think I can get a consensus without exploring all avenues, you're wrong. Now, his voice hardened. I asked you a question. In my opinion, Mitch said through gritted teeth. Your grandfather would fight luxury development to the bitter end. Shane studied him for a moment before nodding, grinning wryly. Agreed. I just needed to hear it from you. What? With effort, Mitch pulled himself together. Were you just yanking my chain? Come on, Mitch. Shane laughed and turned toward the bent nickel. You know the answer to that question. He had been. Mitch ran a hand over his face and then headed for the general store. He imagined the path to historical significance was paved with piles of paperwork, which would be easier to tackle later with a glass or two of wine, especially if Shane decided to pull his chain once more. On his way back to the inn with a bottle of wine in hand, the wind picked up, rushing down the western mountain range on icy feet to dance around Mitch and any exposed skin it could find. It had been in the 40s earlier, but the temperature was falling fast. More snow was coming. Please tell me that's a whiskey bottle you're carrying. Zeke Roosevelt sat in a wheelchair by the large stone fireplace in the inn's common room. His leg was in a splint and propped up. He wore a blue plaid shirt with pearly snaps and a pair of gray sweats with one leg cut off at the knee. His ever-present smile was worn around the edges. The ginger-haired cowboy had been working at the Bucking Bull Ranch north of town until he'd crashed his truck a few weeks ago, breaking his shinbone and sidelining him from the workforce for several months. Given the bunkhouse at the Bucking Bull had no kitchen and was separate from the main house, it would have been difficult for Zeke to recuperate on the ranch during the heart of winter. He'd checked in as a long-term guest, staying in one of the small downstairs guest rooms. It's wine. Mitch held the bottle so Zeke could see. And I don't have to tell you what Noah said before he left about mixing pain meds with alcohol. That was a big no-no. Mitch crossed the foyer and went into the apartment he and Gabby shared behind the check-in desk. Their living space was tight. A kitchen with a small table, a bathroom and 2 bedrooms. The common room served as their living room and had the inn's only television. I'm not taking the pain meds Doc gave me, Zeke called to him. They give me bad dreams. If what Zeke said was true, that explained the worn-out smile. His break had been nasty. Bone through skin. It had been set with plates and screws. Ouch. Still not getting any wine. Mitch lifted the crockpot lid and stirred the chili. Then he returned to the hotel desk and checked his email to see if anyone had answered the ad to replace Noah as Second Chance's doctor. Not a single reply. Mitch felt as tired as Zeke's smile. Could nothing go right today? Look, Dad. Gabby emerged from her room. Instead of toting her laptop, she held up a pair of wooden knitting needles and purple yarn with a couple inches of what Mitch assumed was a scarf. Odette's teaching me and Laurel how to knit. I'm going to sit with her every day until we're done. That's nice of her. It was good for Odette to get out. The old woman routinely sewed all day, every day. Are you going to work with Odette over at her cabin tomorrow? No, Dad. I roll. I'm going to be knitting with Laurel upstairs. Odette isn't coming back here until our scarves are finished. You're going to be knitting with Laurel. Something inside Mitch sat up and blinked. The fashionable Laurel was knitting. The two images didn't fit. Yes, with Laurel. Since Gabby's birthday over a week ago, which was when her braces had come off, she'd become touchy about the things Mitch said. She tossed her strawberry blonde hair over her shoulder and waltzed past him into the front room, sitting on the couch near Zeke's wheelchair. "Where's the love?" he murmured. Where had his precious little girl gone? "Dad," Gabby said with the utmost teenage contempt. She glanced at Zeke from beneath lowered lashes as her cheeks turned a deep red. She had a crush on the cowboy. Zeke was at least 2 decades older than she was, so anything romantic was thankfully ruled out. You can knit later. Mitch wasn't so old he'd forgotten the importance of a teenage crush, but he wasn't going to encourage this one. We need to clean the rooms. Dad. Gabby's shoulders sank, and she frowned as if he'd suggested she clean the toilets with her toothbrush. I'm busy. That you are. Mitch grabbed the basket of fresh linens on their kitchen table, an empty basket for dirty things, and a mop and a bucket filled with cleaning supplies from the nearby pantry. You're busy cleaning rooms. Dad, Gabby grumbled, although she set her knitting aside and followed him to Zeke's small room and its full-size 4-poster bed. You change the sheets and towels. I'll clean the floors and bathroom. He snapped on a pair of plastic cleaning gloves. With the familiarity of practice, they went about their work and immediate worry over the fate of Second Chance faded. The cowboy was neat, possibly because he was restricted to a wheelchair in bed. When Mitch no longer heard the sounds of Gabby changing linens, he stopped wiping down the counter and poked his head out the bathroom door. His daughter was admiring Zeke's straw cowboy hat. And by admiring, Mitch meant she was lifting it from where it hung on a bedpost, looking like she intended to put it on her own head. Leave it, Mitch said, horrified. They'd had long conversations about a guest's right to privacy, and here she was disrespecting that right. I'm done. There was mutiny in those 2 words, but Gabby put the hat back and smoothed the brown log cabin quilt's corners. What am I supposed to do? How about talk to me? Like my little girl used to. Mitch missed her chattering. He gathered the cleaning supplies. Can you keep up with your homework and Odette's knitting lessons? Dad, Gabby huffed, not that he blamed her. It was a silly question. The only homework I haven't done is a history paper on the first governor of Idaho. A term paper. The tension inside Mitch eased. That would require a big chunk of his daughter's time. We don't call them that. Gabby tucked the dirty linens into the empty basket, stacked it on top of the clean linens basket and carried both out, hurrying past Zeke without a word. She climbed the stairs with what looked like a drunken swagger. She'd learned long ago how to traverse the steps and the upstairs hallway like a ninja, avoiding squeaky floorboards. Mitch's footsteps echoed unapologetically on the stairs. Shane's room was next. The man's clothes hung in the small closet, expensive dress shirts, polo shirts and slacks. Slacks, not jeans. Mitch bet there was at least one tie in the man's suitcase. Who brought business clothes to the mountains of Idaho in winter? I did. Mitch had kept 5 suits from his legal days. He even had some slacks, the same brand as Shane's, in a plastic bin at the back of his closet. The difference is I don't wear them every day. Why don't you like Shane? Gabby asked. He reminds me of me, back when I was a lawyer with something to prove. He's unpredictable and sets my teeth on edge. Statements like that weren't something fathers said to their impressionable teenage daughters. I like Shane, he insisted instead. We were just talking outside. Gabby smirked. I like that he's neat, Mitch said, sounding almost as mutinous as Gabby had downstairs. I like that we changed his sheets yesterday, Gabby replied. They only changed the bed. Linens twice a week for long-term guests. Gabby sat down on the black, gray and white quilt, a modern kaleidoscope design. Do you think I'm impatient? Mitch tried not to think about huffs and eye rolls and changed the subject, switching to his helpful dad voice. Are you going to need a trip to the library in Ketchum for this paper? If so, as soon as the weather let up, they could spend a day away from Zeke and the Monroes. We also haven't taken you shopping in a while. Are you growing again? Those jeans look short. My jeans are fine, Dad. And nobody goes to the library to research papers anymore. We use the internet. That earned him a huff and an eye roll. What's wrong with you? I'm losing my little girl. And if the Monroes disappointed Harlan and made it financially impossible to stay, who knew if he'd ever get her back? If they returned to Chicago, his ex-wife might take an interest in Gabby again, might drag her into the country club scene, might try to put her on the beauty pageant circuit, might try to make her value bank account balances over self-worth. Nothing's wrong with me, Mitch insisted, swallowing back the what-ifs. I'm trying to be nice and treat you to a bonus since we're having a good quarter. How about a trip to the bookstore? You know I love the bookstore. Gabby swung her feet around on the bed so she could watch him finish in the bathroom. I know you love the bookstore, Mitch parroted back, heartened. He finished in the bathroom, gathered his supplies and led Gabby to the large corner room on the other end of the inn. The wood floors creaked as he traversed the slanted hall. How much are we talking in terms of a bookstore spending limit? Behind him, Gabby's footfalls were nearly silent. 1 book. 2. $50. While they negotiated, Mitch opened the door to the room occupied by Sophie Monroe and her 2 twin toddlers, who were still outside playing in the snow. He and Gabby paused, letting the extent of the mess sink in. The sheets and blankets were in a tangle on both beds. The pillows were piled in a corner as if someone had made them into a fort. Clothes and shoes were scattered everywhere. In the bathroom, all the towels were wet and sat in a mountainous pile. Gabby slipped past him. I may need a bonus just for cleaning this room. She may be right. They didn't waste more energy talking and went to work. Beds made, bathroom and floors clean, wet towels in the basket in the hallway, dry towels in their place, they moved to the final occupied room. Mitch always saved it for last. Come in, Laurel called before Mitch could knock, adding when he opened the door, I heard you come down the hall. She didn't look up, didn't brush that red hair from her eyes. She sat on top of the sunflower quilt on the bed, bent over a pair of wooden knitting needles. She looped teal yarn around one needle, thought better of it and looped it the other way. Mitch paused just inside the doorway, trying to reconcile the image of the stylish Laurel doing something as homey as knitting. Nice gloves. Laurel nodded toward Mitch's hands, sending the first salvo across his bow. Dad won't clean without them, Gabby said happily, earning her a frown from Mitch. Laurel gave one of her distinctive laughs, hearty har-har. As much as her clothes were sophisticated, her laugh was not. He moved past his daughter into the bathroom, where he faced the shimmery pink evening gown. Pampering your skin is important. Laurel's voice sparkled with amusement. Mitch bet if he glanced at Laurel, her blue eyes would be sparkling, too. Does your father also like manicures? Laurel teased. He does not, Mitch said firmly, manhood imperiled. He moved the mop about quickly, being careful not to touch the dress. The sheets are fine, Laurel said to Gabby. Like I said this morning, I didn't get sick in them or in the bathroom. Woo-hoo. Mitch had to work hard not to smile. Laurel's most admirable trait was her honesty. Mitch valued honesty in all its forms. Now that she was feeling better, her optimism continuously tried to sneak past the defenses he put up. So what if he admired her forthrightness? Didn't mean he lingered when he cleaned her room. The mattress rasped as if Gabby had sat on the bed. I can't believe you didn't know you were pregnant. Mitch frowned and swung the mop with more velocity. The last thing he wanted was for Gabby to idolize Laurel, fashionista and soon-to-be single mom. Sometimes the truth sneaks up on you, Laurel said. The mop handle tangled in the skirt of the pink dress. Frustration loosened Mitch's filter. I've been meaning to ask about this dress of yours. Does it need to hang here all the time? Are you getting ready to go to prom? That dress wasn't made to hang, forgotten in a closet. There was starch to Laurel's words as if she'd gotten her back up. Good. He had yet to see her riled. Witnessing a poor little rich girl tantrum would take the shine off her for both Mitch and Gabby. Gabby poked her head into the bathroom. That dress is so pretty. And it's been hanging in here since she arrived. Mitch didn't try to hide his disapproval. Maybe disapproval was the way to squelch the attraction he felt toward this particular Monroe. I hate to tell you, Mitch, but your closet rod is shamefully low. I had to convert the bathroom to specialty dress storage. Laurel's tone was more suited for a put-down in judges' chambers than a room at the lodgepole inn. If I hung that dress in the closet, the small train would brush the floor. Silk is a delicate thing, a delicate, edible thing, especially to Mothra. Mitch choked on a snort of laughter. He hadn't expected a Godzilla movie reference. What's a Mothra? Gabby swung on the door frame, smiling broadly, flashing her retainer. Wire and those straight teeth he'd paid a small fortune to fix. Mothra is a giant moth that starred in some B-movies. The point is, moths plant larvae on clothes so their young have something to eat when they hatch. And moths love natural fibers like silk and wool. This I did not know. Gabby beamed. Deep down she was a nerd. Did you wear this dress somewhere? I made the dress. Her voice lost its sparkle. There's a picture of it in one of those magazines stacked on the other side of the bed. The one with the sexiest man alive on the cover. Why did you bring the dress here? Gabby ran around to look through the magazines. Mitch hurried to finish cleaning. He wanted to discourage Gabby's interest in less educational things, like video games and gossip magazines. I brought the dress here because, Laurel paused. What do you want to be when you grow up, Gabby? Well, the mattress springs creaked as his daughter sat on the bed once more. I think being a lawyer would be cool because I could help people get justice. Mitch's chest swelled with pride, even as he made a mental note, talk to Gabby about the pros and cons of the legal profession. And then I have this rock collection and I like to look up why they all look different, so geology is in the running. Really? Mitch froze mid-wipe of the toilet bowl. He'd had no idea she was interested in rocks. Still out of sight, his daughter cleared her throat. And then there's singing, blindsided, Mitch blurted, singing. You never sing around the house. Dad, Gabby chastised. Don't eavesdrop. He dropped the cleaning brush into the bucket and came to lean a shoulder against the bathroom door frame. It's impossible not to hear your conversation when I'm scrubbing the toilet. Pretend, Dad. Gabby had a stack of gossip magazines in her lap and a cynical shine in her eyes. Pretend. Laurel gave him a sympathetic look. Mitch didn't want Laurel's sympathy. He wanted his little girl back. Gabby, why would you want to be a shallow rock star? As opposed to a shallow seamstress, Laurel murmured, referencing herself, he supposed. Or a shallow innkeeper. And now him. Whatever profession she follows, Mitch said, reaching for one of his oft-spoken refrains, she'll still be the same person to me. Dad. Who said anything about rock? I listen to country. Gabby marched toward the door, magazines under her arm. You are so out of touch. Mitch groaned as Gabby ran away. The inn groaned as Gabby ran away, her feet pounding on the floor until she slammed a door downstairs. Laurel didn't groan. She studied Mitch. Alone, Mitch and Laurel stared at each other. Alone together, his heart began to pound.